Ladies and gentlemen, what if you could leave your body? This question has haunted humanity for centuries. Are we just flesh and bone, or is there something more? A consciousness that can exist beyond our physical form? Out-of-body experiences, or OBEs, are reported across cultures and eras, often described as floating above one's body with a sense of peace and clarity. Once dismissed as myth or mysticism, these accounts now echo in scientific labs and hospital rooms. This documentary explores the evidence from neuroscience to ancient rituals, asking, are OBEs hallucinations or glimpses into a deeper reality? Join us as we investigate the mystery of who we really are: body, mind, or something beyond. I'm Glenn Schuyler, and I invite you to join me on this journey of consciousness. OBEs are a global phenomenon found in ancient Egyptian texts, Greek philosophy, and Tibetan Buddhist practices. From shamans in the Amazon to yogis in the Himalayas, people describe leaving their bodies and traveling to other realms. Despite cultural differences, the core experience, floating, seeing from above, encountering otherworldly realms, remains strikingly consistent. Is this a universal illusion or a shared human potential? We'll compare rituals, science, and testimonies from around the world, revealing the uncanny coherence of these experiences. The question remains, are we all tapping into the same hidden aspect of consciousness? Science and spirituality have long clashed over OBEs. Are they brain glitches or spiritual journeys? Neurologists discovered that stimulating the temporoparietal junction can trigger OBEs, suggesting a biological basis. Yet some patients report verifiable perceptions during clinical death, challenging purely material explanations. The debate deepens. Is the brain a generator or a receiver of consciousness? We'll meet scientists and philosophers exploring this paradox, where brain scans and mystical insights collide. The OBE may be a bridge between worlds material and immaterial, science and spirit. Prepare to enter a world where the boundaries of mind and body blur. From fMRI studies of voluntary OBEs to sensory deprivation tanks and high-altitude pilot experiences, the mind finds ways to escape its shell. Not all OBEs are peaceful. Some trigger fear and crisis, revealing the risks of untethering consciousness. This journey explores both the wonder and the peril of leaving the body behind. Are we just our brains, or is consciousness a deeper mystery? The evidence is scattered, but the question is universal. Can the mind truly be free? The OBE moved from myth to laboratory when Swiss neurologists accidentally triggered one during epilepsy treatment. Stimulating the temporoparietal junction, a patient vividly floated above her body, an ancient experience now reproducible on demand. This brain region integrates our sense of self in space, disrupts it, and the self detaches. For science, it's a breakthrough. OBEs can be explained by brain function. Yet, for many, this only deepens the mystery. Has science found the soul's doorway, or just a glitch in the system? The ghost, it seems, is both in the machine and beyond it. The initial discovery in Switzerland was not an isolated incident. It sparked a wave of new research as scientists around the world sought to replicate and understand this bizarre phenomenon. Using more advanced, non-invasive techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, researchers could now target the temporoparietal junction in healthy volunteers without the need for surgery. They could essentially aim a magnetic field at the side of a person's head, and in some cases, induce the strange sensations of disembodiment. The results, though not as dramatic as a full-blown out-of-body experience for every participant, were consistently strange. People would report feeling as if they were sinking into the floor or floating slightly above their chair. The voiceovers from these experiments echo the initial patient's confusion and awe. A healthy participant, fully aware they are in a lab, suddenly feels their consciousness drift. "I knew I was sitting in the chair," one voice might explain, "but it felt like part of me was somewhere else, watching. It was like being in two places at once. It wasn't a dream, it was incredibly real, almost more real than normal." These laboratory-induced experiences generated by a machine were producing reports that mirrored the language of shamans and mystics. The feeling of separation, the dual awareness, the sense of observing oneself from a distance, all the core components were there, summoned not by ritual or trauma but by a precise magnetic pulse. These studies allowed scientists to begin creating a neural map of the self by observing which brain networks were active or suppressed during these moments of disembodiment. They could piece together how our brain builds our reality. The temporoparietal junction, along with other areas in the parietal and temporal lobes, works in concert with our visual and vestibular systems, our sense of balance, to create a stable body schema. It's a constant background process that tells us where our limbs are and convinces us that our consciousness resides behind our eyes. The laboratory experiments demonstrated that this is a fragile illusion. By disrupting this network, science could effectively pull the rug out from under our perception of self. This has led to what is known as the brain-based theory of out-of-body experiences. In this model, the experience is not a journey of a soul, but a failure of multi-sensory integration. When the brain gets conflicting information, for example, when the vestibular system signals don't match up with what the eyes are seeing or what the body feels, it may resolve the paradox by creating an entirely new, disembodied viewpoint. This can happen during the trauma of a car accident, the oxygen deprivation of cardiac arrest, or, as it turns out, when a scientist points a magnet at your head. The brain, struggling to make sense of the data, simply creates a hallucination of floating above it all. The brain-based explanation seems elegant and complete. It grounds the out-of-body experience firmly in the physical world of neurons and synapses. It transforms a spiritual mystery into a neurological quirk, a fascinating but ultimately illusory event. If the brain can be tricked into producing the sensation of leaving the body, then surely that is all there is to it. The case, for many skeptics, is closed. However, this tidy explanation fails to account for one of the most perplexing and persistent elements of the phenomenon: veridical perception. This is the part of the story where the lines between hallucination and reality become profoundly and stubbornly blurred, creating a deep paradox for science. Veridical perception refers to instances where a person having an out-of-body experience reports seeing or hearing things that they could not possibly have perceived from their physical body's location, but which are later confirmed to be true. Consider the famous case of a woman named Pam Reynolds, who underwent a radical brain surgery. Her body temperature was lowered, her heart was stopped, and the blood was drained from her head. She was, by all definitions, clinically dead. Yet, she later gave a detailed account of the procedure, describing the specific surgical saw used on her skull, a tool she had never seen before, and recalling snippets of conversation between the surgeons, all while her brain was completely inactive and her eyes were taped shut. These are not isolated stories. The AWARE study, a major scientific investigation into consciousness during cardiac arrest, has collected numerous similar accounts. Patients who were successfully resuscitated sometimes report floating near the ceiling, observing the frantic efforts of the medical team. Some have accurately described the number of people in the room, the clothes they were wearing, or the sequence of events during the resuscitation attempt. How is this possible if the experience is merely an internally generated hallucination created by a dying brain? A hallucination should not contain new, verifiable information from the external world. It is a closed loop, a projection of the mind's own content. This is the great paradox that science has yet to solve. On one hand, we have laboratory evidence showing that the sensation of being out of body can be triggered by stimulating a specific brain region. This strongly suggests a biological origin. On the other hand, we have a growing body of credible, corroborated testimony suggesting that during some of these experiences, genuine perception from a disembodied perspective occurs. It is as if the brain can create a real illusion, an experience that is both a product of neural activity and, somehow, a window into an objective reality beyond the body's senses. This contradiction lies at the very heart of the mystery. The scientific induction of out-of-body states has not provided a final answer. Instead, it has built a crucial bridge between two worlds that were once thought to be entirely separate: the world of empirical neuroscience and the world of subjective, spiritual experience. The fact that a scientist with a magnetic coil can generate a sensation so similar to that described by a meditating monk does not necessarily mean the monk's experience is invalid. On the contrary, it may suggest that both are accessing the same underlying potential of human consciousness, just through very different methods. Science has simply found a physical pathway to a state that was previously reached only through discipline, ritual, or trauma. This convergence forces us to consider more nuanced models of consciousness. Perhaps the brain is not a generator, but more like a receiver or a filter. In this view, consciousness is a more fundamental aspect of reality, and our brain's job is to limit and process it into a manageable, survival-oriented stream of awareness. The feeling of being a single self inside a body. The temporoparietal junction, in this model, would act as a key part of this filtering mechanism. When it is disrupted, whether by a surgeon's electrode, a near-death event, or a shaman's rhythmic drumming, the filter might temporarily fail. This could allow for a brief expanded awareness, one that is not bound by the physical senses. This receiver theory helps to reconcile the paradox of veridical perception. If the out-of-body experience is not just a hallucination, but a momentary shift in the way consciousness is filtered, it might allow for a more direct perception of reality. This would explain how a patient could see events in an operating room while their brain is offline. It wasn't their physical eye seeing, it was their consciousness, momentarily untethered from its biological anchor. While this idea is highly speculative and far from proven, it provides a framework that can accommodate both the neurological data from the lab and the inexplicable eyewitness accounts from the hospital bed. It honors both the science and the strangeness. Ultimately, the induction of out-of-body experiences in the lab has deepened, not diminished, the mystery. It has shown us that the self is a fragile construct, a story the brain tells itself every moment of every day. And sometimes that story can be interrupted. The scientists who first triggered this state did more than just map a brain function. They opened a door. They provided a tangible, physical link to one of humanity's most ancient and profound questions. The journey out of the body, once a path for the soul, now has a signpost planted firmly in the brain. But where that path truly leads, to a mere neurological illusion or to a reality far grander than we imagine, remains the great unanswered question. Thousands of miles from the sterile quiet of a Swiss laboratory and thousands of years before the invention of magnetic brain stimulation, another method for leaving the body was perfected. In cultures across the globe, from the steppes of Siberia to the deserts of Africa and the jungles of the Amazon, indigenous shamans developed powerful and sophisticated technologies of consciousness. These were not machines of metal and wire, but rituals of rhythm, movement, and sound. They discovered that through specific, repetitive actions, they could guide themselves and others into profound altered states, journeys they described as the flight of the soul. At the heart of many of these traditions lies a simple yet profoundly effective technique: the spin. This is not a casual dance. It is a disciplined, intentional practice, surrounded by the flickering light of a fire to the relentless, hypnotic beat of a drum. Participants begin to turn. The rhythm is key. It is the engine of the journey. The steady, pulsating sound entrains the brain waves, creating a state of focused attention while simultaneously overwhelming the ordinary chattering mind. The spinning itself directly challenges the body's sense of equilibrium and spatial orientation. As the world blurs into a seamless whirl of color and light, the brain's vestibular system, which governs our sense of balance, is sent into overdrive. The familiar anchors of up, down, left, and right begin to dissolve, creating a profound sense of disorientation. This deliberate sensory overload is the shaman's equivalent of the neurologist's magnetic coil. Both methods work by disrupting the brain's ability to maintain its stable model of the self within the body. While the scientist targets the temporoparietal junction with precision, the shaman achieves a similar result through a full-body, holistic assault on the senses. The constant spinning confuses the inner ear, the monotonous drumming bypasses the analytical mind, and the focused intention of the ritual provides a framework for the experience. It is a gateway, constructed and passed down through generations, designed to unmoor consciousness from its physical tethers and allow it to travel to what they call other planes of existence. For these cultures, this is not a neurological anomaly or a curious side effect. It is a cornerstone of their spiritual and communal life. The shamanic journey, the out-of-body flight, is a sacred and practical tool. It is how they seek healing for the sick, guidance from ancestral spirits, or wisdom about the intricate web of life. They are not merely inducing a strange sensation for its own sake. They are actively navigating other realities. The spinning ritual is their laboratory. The drum beat is their technology. And the out-of-body state is the means by which they perform their most essential work, bridging the visible world of flesh and bone with the invisible worlds of spirit and energy. The practice of using spinning and rhythm to induce altered states is not an isolated cultural quirk. It is a recurring theme in humanity's spiritual history, a technique that has been independently discovered and refined all over the world. The most famous example, perhaps, is that of the Mevlevi order in Turkey, more commonly known as the whirling dervishes. For over 700 years, they have practiced a moving meditation called the Sama. In this sacred ceremony, the dervishes spin, one hand pointed towards the heavens to receive divine grace, the other pointed towards the earth to channel that grace to the world. Their continuous, graceful turning is a physical prayer, a method for dissolving the ego and achieving a state of ecstatic union with the divine. This pattern repeats across continents and belief systems. In certain Afro-Caribbean traditions like Santeria, intense drumming and dancing are used to invite spirits, or orishas, to possess a practitioner. This often involves a period of frenzied, spinning movement that precedes the trance state, acting as a catalyst for the shift in consciousness. In the ancient shamanic practices of Central Asia, the shaman would often use a drum and dance around a sacred pole, the world tree that connects the different realms. The dance would become faster and more intense, often involving spinning, until the shaman's spirit was believed to ascend the tree and travel to the upper or lower worlds on its mission. The question this raises is profound. Why spinning? Why does this specific disorienting motion appear so consistently as a gateway to the sacred? The physiological explanation points to the disruption of the vestibular system and the creation of a trance state through sensory overload, as we've seen. But the cross-cultural consistency suggests something deeper may be at play. These traditions are not simply making themselves dizzy. They are using the physical act of spinning as a metaphor and a mechanism for a spiritual process. The untethering of the self from the mundane, the dissolution of the ego's rigid boundaries, and the opening of perception to other dimensions of reality. This universal language of trance connects the ancient shaman with the modern scientist. The shaman's ritual and the neurologist's experiment, though worlds apart in their intent and methodology, both converge on the same biological mechanism. They both disrupt the brain's ordinary process of self-location. The shaman calls it soul flight. The scientist calls it a failure of multi-sensory integration. But the raw experience, the feeling of detachment, the altered perception, the sense of journeying beyond the physical body, is remarkably similar. It suggests that these ancient rituals were not based on superstition, but on a deep intuitive understanding of human neurology and the hidden potentials of the mind. When we listen to the first-hand accounts of those who have participated in these rituals, the parallels to other forms of out-of-body experiences become undeniable. The language used is often vivid, psychedelic, and profoundly transformative. A participant, speaking in a voiceover, might describe the initial moments of the journey. At first, there is only the drum, a heartbeat that swallows all thought. Then the spinning takes over. The fire, the faces, they all blur into one. And then, a snap. The feeling of the ground beneath my feet is just gone. The earth melted away beneath me and I was no longer turning. I was flying. These journeys are not described as vague dreams or simple dizziness. They are reported as structured, coherent experiences of traveling through non-physical landscapes. I traveled through tunnels of light, another voiceover might recall. It felt like moving at an impossible speed, but there was no fear. On the other side, I saw beings that were not made of flesh, but of sound and light. They communicated not with words, but with feelings, with pure information. I understood things about myself, about the world, that I could never have known before. This description of light tunnels and intelligent entities is a classic hallmark of both near-death experiences and certain psychedelic journeys. The shamans themselves describe these states with the calm authority of seasoned explorers mapping a familiar, albeit strange, territory. They speak of different realms, an upper world of enlightened spirits, a lower world of animal allies and chthonic energies, and a middle world that is a spiritual counterpart to our own reality. The out-of-body journey allows them to navigate these realms at will. They might describe floating over forests and mountains to find a lost object, or descending into the earth to retrieve a fragment of a sick person's soul. For them, this is not a metaphor. It is a literal, perceptual reality that they access through the gateway of the ritual spin. What is most striking is the convergence of details. The person who has a spontaneous OBE during a car crash, the patient whose brain is stimulated in a lab, and the participant in a shamanic ritual, all might describe a similar sequence. A feeling of separation from the body, a period of rapid movement through a tunnel-like structure, and an arrival in a different, often luminous environment. They might all report a sense of profound peace and a feeling of being more real and alive than they are in their normal waking state. This consistency across such radically different triggers demands an explanation beyond mere cultural conditioning or individual hallucination. When we place the ancient shamanic ritual alongside the modern neurological experiment, we are forced to confront a fascinating possibility. Are these seemingly opposite approaches, one steeped in spirit and tradition, the other in materialism and data, simply different methods for activating the same latent human capacity? The shaman uses the drum and the dance to overload the senses and disrupt the brain's body map. The scientist uses a targeted magnetic pulse to achieve the same disruption. The end result, in both cases, is an experience of consciousness becoming untethered from its physical anchor, a sensation of being out of the body. This parallel challenges the simplistic view that science debunks spiritual experience. The fact that a neurologist can identify the brain region associated with the OBE, the temporoparietal junction, does not necessarily reduce the shaman's journey to a mere brain glitch. Instead, it could be argued that the shaman, through millennia of trial and error, discovered an effective, holistic method for influencing this exact same neural pathway. The ritual is a time-tested technology of the sacred. Science may have revealed the wiring diagram, but the shaman has been expertly flipping the switch all along, using intuition and tradition as his guide. Consider the implications. If different paths lead to the same experiential destination, it suggests that the experience itself is a fundamental potential of the human nervous system, perhaps even of consciousness. It is not owned by any single culture or scientific theory. It is a universal human inheritance. The whirling dervish seeking divine union, the Siberian shaman journeying for healing, and the laboratory volunteer feeling a strange sense of floating are all, in their own way, touching upon the same mystery. They are all experiencing a moment where the brain's rigid model of the self breaks down, opening a door to a different mode of perception. This does not answer the ultimate question of what lies on the other side of that door. Is it just a beautiful, complex hallucination generated by a disoriented brain, a real illusion as some scientists propose? Or is it a genuine glimpse into another layer of reality, a reality that shamans have been navigating for eons? The parallels do not provide a definitive proof, but they deepen the inquiry. They show us that the out-of-body experience is not just a modern curiosity or an ancient superstition. It is a robust, cross-cultural phenomenon, a point of convergence where the oldest spiritual practices and the newest scientific discoveries meet, pointing toward a profound shared mystery about the nature of who we are. Of all the gateways to the out-of-body state, none is more profound or universally feared than the door of death itself. This is not a journey sought through ritual or induced in a laboratory. It is an experience that occurs at the absolute precipice of life, in the chaotic moments when the heart stops beating and the brain's functions cease. For a small but significant number of people who are pulled back from clinical death, their stories are not of darkness and oblivion, but of a startling and lucid detachment. They report what has become known as the near-death experience, or NDE, and at its core often lies the most powerful OBE of all. Imagine the scene, a common one in emergency rooms across the world. A patient goes into sudden cardiac arrest. Monitors blare alarms, a medical team swarms the bedside, and the frantic work of resuscitation begins. For the patient, there is a sudden fade to black, a cessation of all physical sensation. But then, something else happens. A new awareness dawns, not from the perspective of the bed, but from a point high above. In 2014, a man named David experienced this firsthand. After flatlining, he found himself floating peacefully near the ceiling, an untroubled spectator to the desperate scene unfolding below. "I left my body," he recalls in an interview. "I floated above the bed. I saw them shocking me, but I wasn't afraid. It was peaceful." This account is not unique. It is a story told with remarkable consistency by people from all walks of life, cultures, and belief systems who have survived a close brush with death. The experience is characterized by a profound sense of calm, a complete absence of pain or fear, and a feeling of being more real and alive than ever before. This disembodied perspective is often the first stage of a more extensive journey, one that can include traveling through a tunnel of light, encountering deceased relatives or beings of light, and undergoing a panoramic life review. But it is this initial separation, this act of watching one's own body from the outside, that provides the most direct challenge to our understanding of consciousness. How can a person have a clear, structured perceptual experience when their heart is not beating and their brain is deprived of blood flow, the very fuel it needs to function? According to our current medical models, consciousness should be impossible in such a state. The brain without oxygen should be incapable of generating any experience at all, let alone one as complex and coherent as an OBE. Yet, the testimonies persist. They suggest that consciousness may not be as dependent on continuous brain function as we believe. At the very moment the body is failing, something else, a self, a soul, a point of awareness, appears to separate and continue its existence unhindered and unafraid. If near-death experiences were merely subjective feelings of peace or hallucinations of floating, they could be more easily dismissed by science. They might be explained as a final comforting burst of neurochemicals in a dying brain, or maybe just a last dream before the end. However, the phenomenon becomes far more difficult to explain away when it includes veridical perception. This is the critical element where NDE survivors report observing real, verifiable details of their environment that they had no physical means of knowing. These are not dreamlike impressions. They are specific, factual observations made from a perspective outside their own inert body, and they represent a profound anomaly for a purely biological model of the mind. Consider the classic cases that have been documented for decades. A patient whose eyes are taped shut for surgery later describes the unique color of the surgeon's gloves, or a specific instrument left on top of a machine across the room. Or a man who is clinically dead in one part of the hospital later recounts a conversation his family members were having in a waiting room down the hall. These are details that, honestly, could not have been guessed or inferred. One famous account involves a migrant worker named Maria, who, during her cardiac arrest, claimed to have floated out of her hospital room and seen a single tennis shoe on a third-floor window ledge of the building. A skeptical social worker later went to check, and to her astonishment found the shoe exactly where Maria had described it. These accounts of impossible knowledge transform the NDE from a personal story into a piece of challenging evidence. They directly contradict the idea that the experience is a simple hallucination. Hallucinations are, by definition, generated from the mind's own internal content, memories, fears, and expectations. They do not typically provide new, accurate information about the external world. The ability of some NDEers to perceive their surroundings veridically suggests that some aspect of their consciousness is genuinely operating outside the confines of their sensory organs. It's as if they possess a functioning point of view that is independent of their eyes and ears. This is the central paradox that NDE testimonies present to the scientific world. The brain-based theories, which are so effective at explaining laboratory-induced out-of-body experiences, really struggle to account for this data. How can a non-functioning brain create an experience that accurately perceives objective reality? The question hangs in the air, unanswered by conventional neurology. It forces us to consider more radical possibilities. That consciousness is not strictly a product of the brain, but maybe a more fundamental field that the brain receives and filters. When the brain shuts down, perhaps the filter is removed, allowing for a more direct, non-local form of perception to occur. In an effort to move beyond anecdotal evidence and investigate this phenomenon with scientific rigor, a groundbreaking project was launched. The AWARE study, which stands for Awareness During Resuscitation. Led by Dr. Sam Parnia, this massive multi-hospital investigation represents one of the most serious and large-scale attempts to study consciousness in the brain during cardiac arrest. The central goal is to objectively test the claims of veridical perception in near-death experiences. The researchers are not just collecting stories after the fact. They are setting up an experiment to see if consciousness can truly perceive the world when the brain is offline. The methodology is both simple and ingenious. In hospital rooms, where cardiac arrest is a possibility, shelves are installed high up near the ceiling. On these shelves, images are placed facing upwards, completely invisible from anywhere in the room at ground level. The only way a person could see these images is if they were genuinely floating near the ceiling. If a patient is successfully resuscitated from cardiac arrest and reports having had an out-of-body experience, they are then interviewed. If they claim to have seen the target image, it would provide powerful, objective evidence that their consciousness was perceiving from a location outside their physical body. The initial results of the AWARE study, published in 2014, were tantalizing. While none of the survivors who had an out-of-body experience in a room with a target were able to identify the image, the study did produce one of the most well-documented cases of veridical perception on record. A 57-year-old man gave a highly detailed and accurate account of his own resuscitation. He recalled hearing a specific automated voice announce "shock the patient," and he correctly identified the bald-headed doctor who was leading the team. He recalled the actions of the nurses and the sequence of events with remarkable clarity, all during a period when he was clinically dead for over 3 minutes. His auditory awareness was later verified against the hospital records. While the smoking gun of seeing the hidden image remains elusive, the AWARE study has succeeded in bringing the study of near-death experiences into the mainstream of medical science. It has confirmed that a significant percentage of cardiac arrest survivors report memories and cognitive experiences from a time of clinical death, challenging the assumption that the mind is completely annihilated. By applying rigorous scientific methods to this final frontier of human experience, researchers are beginning to build a bridge between the spiritual and the biological. The mystery of where the mind goes when the heart stops is no longer just a question for philosophy. It is now a question being asked in the heart of the emergency room. Not all out-of-body experiences are accidental. They are not always the result of a neurological glitch, a traumatic event, or a brush with death. For a dedicated community of explorers, leaving the body is not a spontaneous event, but a practiced skill, a discipline cultivated through patience, intention, and specific mental techniques. This is the world of astral projection, a term used to describe the intentional act of separating one's consciousness from the physical body to explore other realms. Unlike the sudden shock of a lab-induced or near-death out-of-body experience, this is a conscious exit, a deliberate and controlled journey undertaken by a person who is very much alive and well, often lying peacefully in their own bed. The fundamental belief behind astral projection is that human beings possess a subtle, non-physical counterpart to their physical form, often called the astral body or etheric body. This second body is thought to be the vehicle of consciousness, capable of detaching from the physical shell and traveling independently. The goal of the practitioner or astral traveler is to learn how to consciously shift their awareness from the physical body to this subtle body. This requires a unique state of mind, a delicate balance on the razor's edge between deep relaxation and focused wakefulness. It's often achieved in the twilight state between sleeping and waking, known as the hypnagogic state, where the mind is fluid and the grip of physical reality is loosened. The pioneers of modern astral projection, such as Robert Monroe, Sylvan Muldoon, and Hereward Carrington, meticulously documented their experiences and developed systematic methods for others to follow. Monroe, an American radio broadcasting executive, began having spontaneous out-of-body experiences in the 1950s. Initially terrified, he decided to study the phenomenon with scientific rigor, founding the Monroe Institute to research human consciousness. His work demystified the process, transforming it from an occult art into a learnable skill. He and others created a roadmap for would-be travelers, detailing the signposts, potential roadblocks, and specific techniques needed to navigate the transition from physical to non-physical reality. These explorers emphasize that this is not a fantasy or a dream. They insist that the state achieved is one of heightened awareness and clarity, distinct from the chaotic and often nonsensical nature of dreaming. Practitioners are taught to perform reality checks, to maintain their critical faculties, and to approach their journeys as a form of personal investigation. The training involves learning to quiet the internal dialogue, achieve profound physical relaxation while keeping the mind alert, and then applying specific mental triggers to initiate the separation. It is a process that requires immense discipline, casting the practitioner not as a passive victim of a strange experience, but as an active pilot of their own consciousness. Among the many techniques developed for inducing a conscious out-of-body experience, two elements appear with remarkable frequency in the literature: the vibrational state and the rope method. The vibrational state is often described as the critical precursor to separation, really the final sign that the astral body is ready to detach. Practitioners report that as they lie in a state of deep relaxation, a strange and powerful sensation begins to sweep through their body. It's described as an intense, internal buzzing, or a feeling of rapid vibration, almost as if every cell in their body is humming with a powerful electric current. For beginners, this sensation can be pretty alarming, sometimes creating a fear that stops the process cold. But experienced travelers recognize these vibrations as a key gateway. They learn to welcome and even intensify them, understanding them not as a physical event, but as a perceptual shift. It's the astral body beginning to move out of phase with the physical body. Robert Monroe described it as a syncopated beat between his two forms. The sound can be deafening, a roaring or rushing noise that fills the mind, similar to sounds reported during near-death experiences. The key is to remain calm and detached, to just roll with the vibrations rather than fighting them, allowing them to build in intensity until the point of separation is reached, that moment when the connection to the physical form becomes tenuous. Once the vibrational state is achieved, the practitioner employs a specific technique to complete the separation. The most famous of these is the rope method, popularized by Robert Bruce. In this visualization exercise, the traveler, while lying perfectly still, imagines a thick, strong rope hanging down from the ceiling directly above them. They're instructed not to visualize themselves reaching for it with their physical hands, but to use their imaginary non-physical hands, their so-called astral hands. The goal is to generate a real tactile sensation of grabbing the rope and pulling hand over hand with focused intent. The imagined physical action serves as a powerful trigger for the disembodied self. This act of climbing the imaginary rope creates a powerful mental lever. It gives the consciousness a clear upward direction and a focus point outside the physical body. As the practitioner mentally pulls, they may feel a sensation of becoming lighter, or even a pop or a click as the astral body finally dislodges from its physical counterpart. Other popular techniques work on a similar principle, the rollout method, where you imagine rolling out of your body as if rolling out of bed, or the point shift method, where you intensely focus your awareness on a point across the room until your consciousness simply transfers there. All these methods are tools designed to trick the mind into releasing its rigid identification with the physical body. Once separation is achieved, where do these travelers go? According to practitioners, the journey begins in a familiar place, a perfect, non-physical replica of their immediate surroundings. This is often called the real-time zone or the etheric plane. The astral body floats free, often in the very room where the physical body lies sleeping. Travelers describe being able to explore their own homes, passing through walls and doors, and observing their physical form resting peacefully. This initial stage serves as a confirmation of the experience's reality, as the environment is an exact match to the physical world. Yet the traveler is perceiving it from a completely new, liberated perspective. From this starting point, the journeys can become far more expansive and honestly pretty strange. Experienced projectors report that by focusing their intent, they can travel far beyond their physical location. Some describe flying over cities, landscapes, and even soaring into outer space, observing the Earth from above. These experiences are described with a sense of hyper-realism, a vividness and clarity that they claim surpasses even normal waking perception. They're not passive observers, they're active agents in these environments, able to move, interact, and explore at the speed of thought. The only limit to where they can go, they say, is their own fear, focus, and energy level. Beyond the replica of the physical world, astral travelers speak of other dimensions, or astral planes. These are described as realms of pure thought and emotion, where the environment is fluid and shaped by the consciousness of its inhabitants. These planes can range from heavenly landscapes of light and beauty to dark, confusing, and sometimes frightening regions. Here they may encounter other travelers or non-physical entities, beings described as guides, spirits, or simply other forms of consciousness native to these realms. The narratives from these deeper journeys are often profoundly symbolic and transformative, providing personal insights, spiritual guidance, or simply a radical expansion of one's concept of reality. While science remains deeply skeptical, debating whether these are elaborate lucid dreams or complex hallucinations, the practitioners themselves are unwavering. For them, the consistency and coherence of their experiences are proof enough. They describe a universe that is vastly more complex and multi-layered than the one we perceive with our five senses. They report back from their journeys with a changed perspective, often with a diminished fear of death and a greater sense of connection to a universal consciousness. Whether objective reality or an intricate projection of the deep psyche, the how-to guide to astral projection offers a tantalizing promise, the chance to become a conscious explorer in the vast, unknown territory of the mind. The out-of-body experience is not confined to the stillness of a bedroom or the crisis of a hospital. It can also occur in one of the most dynamic and technologically advanced environments imaginable, the cockpit of a high-performance aircraft. High above the surface of the Earth, where the sky darkens to a deep indigo and the planet's curve becomes visible, some pilots have reported a bizarre and unsettling perceptual distortion. It's known as the break-off phenomenon. This is not a mechanical failure or a simple case of vertigo. It's a profound alteration of consciousness where the pilot feels themselves detached from their own body, becoming a spectator to their own flight. It's a spontaneous out-of-body experience triggered by the unique stresses of the upper atmosphere. Imagine a pilot, encased in a complex machine, streaking through the stratosphere at supersonic speeds. The world below is a distant map, and the sense of isolation is immense. The constant drone of the engine, the vast featureless expanse of the sky, and the lack of familiar visual cues can create a form of sensory deprivation. In this state, some pilots have described a sudden shift in their point of view. A voiceover might recount the experience. I was flying straight and level, everything was normal. Then suddenly I wasn't in the cockpit anymore. I felt like I was sitting on the wing looking back at myself, at the controls. I could see my own hands on the stick, my helmet, everything. It was calm, detached. I was watching myself fly. This phenomenon was first documented in the 1950s during the era of high-altitude test flights, but it remains a known, if rarely discussed, aspect of modern aviation. The experience is characterized by a feeling of serene detachment and disembodiment. The pilot feels as though they are physically outside the aircraft, observing it from a short distance. Despite the utter strangeness of the situation, it is not typically accompanied by panic. Instead, pilots report a sense of tranquility and profound separation from their immediate high-stakes reality. It's a moment where the mind, under a unique combination of sensory underload and existential pressure, seems to simply step outside of its container. The break-off phenomenon provides another piece of the puzzle, a data point from a world far removed from mystics or medical patients. It demonstrates that the link between our consciousness and our physical body can be disrupted by specific environmental conditions. Here, the trigger is not a near-death event or a spiritual practice, but a combination of high altitude, isolation, and sensory monotony. The experience mirrors the core components of a classic out-of-body experience: a shift in perceptual location, a view of one's own body from an external vantage point, and a feeling of emotional detachment. It suggests that the out-of-body state is a fundamental response pattern of the human brain, one that can be activated by a surprisingly diverse set of triggers. What is it about high-altitude flight that can cause the mind to perform such a strange perceptual maneuver? The explanations for the break-off phenomenon are rooted in the complex interplay between psychology and physiology under extreme stress. Flying a high-performance aircraft, particularly during combat or testing, subjects the body and mind to immense G-forces. This physical stress can affect blood flow to the brain, potentially leading to altered states of consciousness. However, the break-off phenomenon often occurs during calm, straight and level flight, suggesting that physical force is not the only factor. The psychological pressure and unique sensory environment seem to be just as important, if not more so. One leading theory links the phenomenon to a form of spatial disorientation. At very high altitudes, the usual visual references that anchor our sense of place, the horizon, clouds, landscape features, are diminished or absent. The pilot is suspended in a vast, empty void. This lack of external sensory input can create a conflict within the brain's positioning systems. The vestibular system in the inner ear might be sending one set of signals about motion and orientation, while the visual system is receiving very little information at all. In this state of sensory ambiguity, the brain might struggle to maintain a coherent sense of self-location, resolving the conflict by creating a disembodied viewpoint as a kind of best guess. Another perspective views the phenomenon as a psychological defense mechanism, a form of depersonalization. The role of a fighter pilot is one of immense responsibility and potential danger. The mind might cope with this overwhelming stress by creating a sense of emotional and physical distance. By breaking off from the body, the pilot's consciousness enters a state of detached observation, allowing them to function calmly without being crippled by fear or the weight of the moment. It's as if the mind decides, this situation is too intense for me to handle, and creates a separate observer self that can manage the task objectively. It's a radical act of mental self-preservation. Ultimately, the break-off phenomenon serves as a powerful real-world example of the brain's capacity to rearrange its own reality under pressure. It bridges the gap between the neurological theories of out-of-body experiences and spontaneous, real-life occurrences. Like the scientists stimulating the temporoparietal junction, the conditions of high-altitude flight disrupt the brain's ability to integrate sensory information and maintain a stable body schema. The result is the same. The self becomes unglued from the body. It reinforces the idea that our feeling of being in our bodies is not a fundamental truth, but an active and fragile construction, a story the brain tells itself that can be unexpectedly and profoundly revised. Another fascinating pathway into the out-of-body state begins not in the sky, nor in a lab, but in the private theater of our own minds during sleep. This is the world of lucid dreaming, the state of becoming consciously aware that you are dreaming while the dream is still happening. For most people, dreams are a passive experience. We are characters in a play without knowing we are on a stage. A lucid dreamer, however, wakes up within the dream. They gain the ability to think clearly, to remember the waking world, and often to exert a degree of control over the dream's narrative and environment. This state of conscious awareness within a dream provides a unique launching pad for an even stranger experience. A significant number of lucid dreamers report that they can transition directly from a lucid dream into what feels like a full-blown out-of-body experience. The process is often described as a distinct and powerful shift. A person becomes aware they're dreaming. They might be in a fantastical landscape or a mundane recreation of their home. Realizing it's a dream, they decide to attempt a transition. A common technique involves focusing their will or performing a physical action within the dream, such as spinning their dream body around rapidly, a technique that curiously mirrors the shamanic rituals we've already explored. As they perform this action, the dream environment begins to destabilize. The visuals might dissolve into blackness or become a blur of abstract energy. Then, a powerful sensation takes over, often a feeling of intense vibrations, a loud rushing sound, or a sense of being pulled through a vortex. This is the transitional phase, a moment of sensory chaos that precedes a profound change in perception. When the chaos subsides, the dreamer finds themselves not in a dream world anymore, but in what feels like a hyper-realistic, non-physical version of objective reality. Often they discover they are floating in their own bedroom, looking down at their physical body asleep in bed. This transition from lucid dream to out-of-body experience is a critical piece of the puzzle because it blurs the line between the two states. Skeptics often argue that all out-of-body experiences are simply a type of lucid dream. However, those who claim to have experienced both insist there is a clear, qualitative difference. A lucid dream, they say, still feels like a mental construction, however vivid. The transition to an out-of-body experience, they report, feels like exiting that mental space and entering something more real, more solid, and more objective. The dream is a simulation. The out-of-body experience, they contend, is a journey into a genuine, non-physical environment that begins with the perception of their own sleeping body. The lucid dream to out-of-body shift poses a fascinating question. Is the dreamer simply creating a more realistic dream? Or are they actually leaving the dream state and entering a different state of consciousness entirely? The narrative account suggests the latter. A dreamer might become lucid, then use the spinning technique. They feel the characteristic vibrations and hear the rushing sounds. Then, there is a distinct snap or feeling of separation. The dream imagery vanishes completely. They find themselves floating in their bedroom, a perfect, stable replica of the physical room. A consistency that is often absent in the fluid and changing nature of dreams. Practitioners describe the subsequent experience as having a different texture from a dream. The laws of physics, while flexible, seem more consistent. The clarity of perception is heightened, often described as more real than real. Most importantly, they report seeing their own body lying in bed, a specific anchor point that distinguishes the experience from a typical dream narrative. This act of observing the sleeping self from an external perspective is the hallmark of the out-of-body experience, and its emergence from a lucid dream suggests a sequential process. The mind first becomes conscious within a dream, and then uses that consciousness as a key to unlock a different door. This pathway offers a potential model for how consciousness can detach. The lucid dream acts as a training ground. It allows a person to become familiar with a state of non-physical awareness in a relatively safe, self-contained environment. Within the dream, they can practice manipulating their point of view and exercising their intention without the fear and sensory shock that can accompany a spontaneous, waking out-of-body experience. The transition techniques like spinning or focusing intent may act as a way to disengage the mind's consciousness from the dream-generating parts of the brain and shift it into the state of disembodied perception associated with the out-of-body experience. What begins as a dream, a journey into the psyche, can become something more. It can become a passage into what some call universal consciousness, a state where the self is no longer bound by the narrative of the dream or the senses of the body. The lucid dream shift represents a controlled, self-initiated exploration of the very boundaries of the mind. It suggests that consciousness is not a monolithic state, but a spectrum of possibilities. By first mastering the dream world, some explorers claim they have found a back door, a hidden passage that leads out of the theater of the mind and into the vast, mysterious reality that may lie just beyond it. Humanity has long sought pathways to alter consciousness, not only through ritual and discipline, but also through the ingestion of sacred and powerful substances. The link between psychedelics and profound, spiritually significant experiences is as old as civilization itself. Across cultures, plants like ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, and peyote have been used as chemical keys, tools to unlock the doors of perception and explore realms beyond ordinary reality. Among the vast spectrum of experiences these substances can induce, one of the most profound is the out-of-body experience. Under the influence of these powerful molecules, the self's anchor to the body can be dramatically and abruptly severed, launching the user into a state of disembodied awareness that rivals any other trigger. These are not gentle drifts from the physical form. Psychedelic-induced OBEs are often described as explosive, all-encompassing events. A user might report the feeling of being shot out of their body like a cannonball, propelled into cosmic landscapes of impossible geometry and color. The sense of self, the ego, which is so central to our waking identity, can completely dissolve. This ego death is a hallmark of high-dose psychedelic experiences, and it is in this state of dissolution that the out-of-body perception often emerges. Without the ego's constant narration and identification with the physical form, consciousness is free to perceive from a new, untethered vantage point, becoming a pure point of awareness floating in a sea of visual and conceptual information. The narratives from these chemical journeys bear a striking resemblance to those from other OBE triggers. People describe traveling through tunnels of light, encountering intelligent entities, and experiencing a sense of cosmic unity and timelessness. The key difference is often the sheer intensity and visual complexity of the experience. While a near-death OBE might be serene and clear, a psychedelic OBE can be a torrential flood of sensory information, a whirlwind tour of the universe's inner machinery. The experience can be overwhelmingly beautiful and enlightening, offering profound insights into the nature of reality and one's place within it, a feeling of being connected to everything. However, this powerful pathway is not without its risks. The very potency that makes these substances effective gateways also makes them unpredictable. The chemical key can unlock a door to heaven or a door to hell, and the user often has little control over which way it will swing. The profound dissociation can be terrifying, leading to experiences of cosmic abandonment or encounters with threatening energies. The journey requires careful preparation, a safe setting, and a deep respect for the power being unleashed. These substances are not recreational tools for a casual escape. They are potent modulators of consciousness that can irrevocably alter one's perception of self and world. While classic psychedelics like psilocybin act on serotonin receptors to dissolve the ego, another class of substance takes a different route to the out-of-body state. Dissociative anesthetics, most notably ketamine, work by blocking signals at the NMDA receptors in the brain, effectively disconnecting the mind from its sensory input. Originally developed as an anesthetic for the battlefield, ketamine has gained a reputation for its ability to induce powerful, dose-dependent states of dissociation at subanesthetic levels. Low doses might create a feeling of being slightly detached or drunk, but as the dose increases, it can precipitate a complete separation of consciousness from the body, and experienced users often refer to as entering the K-hole. This is the ultimate dissociation. Testimonials from those who have experienced it are otherworldly. "I was in another world," one voice might recount. "My body wasn't just left behind, it dissolved. It ceased to exist as a concept. And I wasn't my name, my history, or my problems anymore. I was just awareness. I was infinite. I floated through spaces made of pure thought, and the idea of having a body to return to seemed like a distant, irrelevant memory." This is not just seeing the body from above. It is the experience of consciousness existing in a void, completely untethered from any physical or personal identity, a state of pure being. The landscapes of the ketamine-induced OBE are often described as being starker and more geometric than those of classic psychedelics. Users report floating through vast, empty spaces, encountering complex, abstract structures, and feeling as though they are witnessing the fundamental architecture of reality itself. The emotional tone is typically one of profound neutrality and detachment. The terror of ego death is often replaced by a calm, clinical observation of one's own non-existence. This quality has made ketamine a subject of intense research for treating severe depression. as it may allow patients to temporarily disconnect from their patterns of negative self-rumination and view their lives from a completely new objective perspective. The ketamine experience provides a compelling chemical model for the OBE. By specifically targeting the brain system for integrating self and sensation, it reliably produces a state of disembodiment. This reinforces the neurological argument that the OBE is a function of brain processes, a result of disrupting the networks that create our sense of being in a body. Yet, the profound and often transformative nature of the journey keeps the mystery alive. Is it merely a neurological disconnect, a sophisticated hallucination of non-existence? Or does the temporary shutdown of these systems allow consciousness to perceive its own fundamental nature, a state of pure awareness that exists prior to its association with a physical form? The path to the out-of-body state is not always through loud, chaotic experiences like shamanic drumming or powerful chemicals. It can also be found in the absolute opposite, profound, silent stillness. For millennia, contemplatives and mystics have used meditation not just to calm the mind, but to systematically deconstruct the sense of self. Through intense concentration and sustained mindfulness, a practitioner can observe their own consciousness with such clarity that the illusion of a solid, enduring I begins to fall apart. At the deepest levels of this practice, the self can shatter, leading to experiences of non-duality, cosmic consciousness, and classic out-of-body states. This meditative OBE is not usually sudden or explosive. It is the culmination of a long, disciplined process of letting go. As the meditator sits day after day, they learn to detach from their thoughts, emotions, and sensations. They observe the breath, the body, the sounds without identifying with them. This creates a powerful sense of disidentification. The practitioner begins to realize, I am not my thoughts, I am the awareness of my thoughts. I am not my body, I am the awareness of my body. This gradual separation can reach a critical point where awareness withdraws completely from the physical form. The experience can be incredibly subtle. After hours of stillness, the feeling of being located behind the eyes simply dissolves. Awareness seems to be present everywhere at once. They might perceive their own body sitting there, not from above, but from a pervasive, all-encompassing viewpoint. It is less a journey out of the body and more of an expansion beyond the body, where all boundaries completely disappear into a unified field of consciousness. This path, while seemingly gentle, presents its own profound challenges, as seen in the case of the woman who saw herself burning. The deep stillness can bring forth not only peace, but also the darkest contents of the mind. As defenses relax, repressed fears and traumas can surface with overwhelming intensity. The experience of the self-dissolving can be interpreted as literal death, triggering primal survival instincts and panic. Meditation is not just a relaxation technique. It is a deep dive into the nature of mind, a journey that can lead to incredible liberation or to the terrifying precipice where the self fragments in the face of the infinite. In the ongoing quest to bridge the gap between subjective experience and objective measurement, science has long sought a definitive test case for the out-of-body experience. Anecdotes, however compelling, are not data. Researchers needed something more. A person who could not only have an OBE, but who could induce one at will, on demand, while under the watchful eye of our most advanced brain imaging technology. In a Canadian research unit, they found her. A university student who claimed she could voluntarily enter an out-of-body state, a skill she had cultivated since childhood. This presented an unprecedented opportunity to move beyond reenactments and after-the-fact reports and to capture a snapshot of the brain as it performs this extraordinary feat in real time. The setting was the epitome of clinical observation, the cold, loud, and confining tube of a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. This device doesn't just take a static picture of the brain, it tracks blood flow, revealing which neural networks are active from one moment to the next. The young woman was instructed to lie perfectly still, and when prompted, to initiate the out-of-body experience she had described. She was to will herself out of her body, to float above the scanner, and to observe the scene from this disembodied perspective. For the first time, scientists would not be studying the aftermath of an OBE, but the neurological process of its birth. Her description of the experience was classic. She reported feeling herself moving, rolling, and spinning out of her physical body. Then, she experienced a sense of floating near the ceiling, looking down at her own form lying motionless inside the machine. She was aware of her physical body and her other body simultaneously, a dual consciousness that is a hallmark of these states. All the while, the fMRI scanner hummed and clicked, recording the intricate dance of neural activity that accompanied her subjective journey. The ghost, once a fleeting specter of folklore and near-death testimony, was now willingly entering the machine to have its portrait taken. This case was a crucial turning point. It shifted the study of willed OBEs from the realm of parapsychology into mainstream neuroscience. The question was no longer simply, what does it feel like, but what does the brain do? What are the specific neural signatures of this profound shift in self-perception? By capturing this data, the researchers hope to identify the precise brain regions that govern our sense of being embodied. They were on the verge of watching the brain actively deconstruct its own most fundamental assumption, that the self is located inside the body. It was a bold attempt to map the very mechanism of a soul's supposed escape. As the researchers analyzed the fMRI scans, a remarkable and counterintuitive picture emerged. When the subject entered her out-of-body state, it wasn't a case of one specific OBE spot lighting up. Instead, they observed a complex pattern of activation and deactivation across several key brain networks. Most significantly, they saw a widespread deactivation in the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes information from the eyes. This was startling. While she was subjectively seeing herself from above, the primary vision center of her brain was shutting down, suggesting her experience was not a visual hallucination in the conventional sense. It was a non-visual form of seeing. Simultaneously, a different set of areas flickered to life. The scientists noted unusual activity in regions associated with kinesthetic imagery, the mental representation of bodily movement. These were the same areas that would be active if she were imagining herself spinning or floating. Critically, they also saw activation in the left temporoparietal junction, the very same region identified in earlier studies as being crucial for self-perception and body ownership. It appeared her brain was generating a powerful sensation of movement while simultaneously disrupting the mechanism that binds the self to the body, creating a perfect neurological storm for an OBE. The scientist leading the study noted, "We saw strong deactivation in the visual cortex, while activating the left-sided brain areas that are involved in kinesthetic imagery and self-other discrimination." She was, in a sense, seeing with a different part of her brain. This finding supports the idea that the OBE is not a dream or a simple fantasy. It is a genuine perceptual state, but one that operates through different neural channels than our ordinary waking sight. The brain was creating a vivid experience of a disembodied self by suppressing normal sensory input and activating networks related to imagined movement and self-awareness. Science doesn't yet know how she learned to control these specific brain networks with such precision. Her ability remains a profound mystery. But the fMRI scans provided the first ever neural blueprint of a voluntary OBE. They showed that this experience, long described in spiritual and esoteric terms, has a clear and repeatable physical correlate in the brain. The data did not necessarily explain away the mystery, but it did ground it in tangible biology. The experience of the spirit leaving the body, it turns out, leaves a clear and distinct footprint in the intricate circuitry of the mind. From the high-tech environment of an fMRI scanner, our journey takes us to a place of profound simplicity and sensory silence, the flotation tank. Here, the goal is not to observe the brain with machines, but to strip away all external input and see what the mind does when left entirely to its own devices. A flotation tank, or sensory deprivation tank, is a lightless, soundproof pod filled with a super-saturated solution of Epsom salt and water, heated to perfect skin temperature. When you lie back, you float effortlessly, weightless. There is no light, no sound, no pressure, no temperature. Every external signal that normally anchors your sense of self in the world is removed. In this void of sensation, the brain's normal routines begin to break down. Without gravity, the vestibular system has no down to report. Without light, the visual cortex has nothing to process. Without sound, the auditory system falls silent. The boundaries of the body, normally defined by touch and temperature, begin to dissolve into the surrounding water. For many, this leads to a state of deep relaxation. But for some, as the experience deepens, the very construct of the self begins to unravel. This is where the flotation tank becomes a modern gateway to the out-of-body state. The testimonies from deep flotation sessions echo the language of mystics and meditators. A voiceover might describe the transition. After a while, you forget you have a body. It's not a thought, it's just a fact. The feeling of me being inside a physical form just evaporates. I became nothing and everything. I was just a point of awareness floating in an infinite, dark and silent space. This is a gentle, passive form of OBE, induced not by trauma or intense action, but by the complete absence of stimulation. The mind, deprived of its usual anchors, lets go of its identification with the body. This process reveals how much of our identity is constantly being built and reinforced by our senses. We know we are here because we feel the chair beneath us, see the room around us, and hear the sounds of the world. When all of that is taken away, the brain is left with only its own internal processes. For some, this can lead to a profound disembodiment, a feeling of floating through inner landscapes. A Quora user describes their journey: I became nothing and everything. I floated through mountains made of thought and valleys carved from silence. The sensory void becomes a canvas onto which the deepest structures of consciousness are projected. The experience in the flotation tank represents perhaps the most fundamental form of the out-of-body state. It is not about traveling to other places or seeing one's own body from above. It is about the dissolution of the self-model altogether. When sensory deprivation is deep enough, the illusion of being a separate individual ego can completely unravel. What is left is a state that many describe as pure consciousness, a boundless awareness that is not someone, but is simply being. This experience lies at the heart of many non-dual spiritual traditions, which teach that the separate self is the primary illusion that separates us from reality. This state challenges our very definition of an out-of-body experience. Perhaps the goal is not to get out of the body, but to realize that we were never exclusively in it to begin with. Our brain, in its constant effort to make sense of the world, creates a convenient focal point, the ego, and locates it within our physical form. The flotation tank, by removing the sensory data that supports this model, allows us to experience a more fundamental truth, that our awareness is not a small thing contained within a body, but a vast field within which the body and the world appear. This unraveling of the self can be profoundly liberating. The anxieties, identities, and stories that we cling to are seen as temporary constructs. What remains is a sense of deep peace and connection to a larger whole. However, like other pathways, this dissolution can also be frightening. For a mind that is rigidly attached to its identity, the experience of that identity dissolving can feel like death or insanity. The void can be perceived as either a comforting womb of potential or a terrifying abyss of non-existence, depending entirely on the traveler's mindset. It is the ultimate confrontation with the self by way of its own absence. Ultimately, the flotation tank serves as a perfect metaphor for the entire inquiry into out-of-body experiences. By stripping away everything external, it forces us to confront the internal. It shows us that the reality we take for granted is a carefully constructed illusion, a story told by our senses and our brain. When that story is paused, what is left? A ghost in the machine? A soul set free? Or simply a more fundamental state of awareness, untethered and infinite? The fMRI provides a map of the brain, but the float tank provides a journey into the territory it describes. What's left after the self dissolves in the darkness is for you to decide. Our journey has taken us across continents, through centuries, and into the very heart of the human condition. We've traveled from the sterile precision of a neuroscience laboratory to the fire-lit chaos of a shamanic ritual. We've stood at the precipice of death with cardiac arrest survivors and soared into the stratosphere with high-altitude pilots. We've explored the disciplined techniques of astral projectors and, the spontaneous visions of lucid dreamers. We've delved into the chemical pathways opened by psychedelics and the profound stillness of the meditation cushion. From every corner of human experience, one strange, persistent story emerges, the story of consciousness leaving the body. Each thread we've examined, though different in color and texture, weaves into a single, complex tapestry of strangeness. The scientist stimulating the temporoparietal junction with a magnetic coil and the shaman using a drumbeat to induce a trance are, in their own languages, describing a similar disruption of our sense of self. The pilot experiencing the break-off phenomenon and the patient floating above the operating table both report a calm, detached perspective on their own physical form. The astral traveler meticulously climbing an imaginary rope and the lucid dreamer spinning to exit their dream are both using focused intent to shift their point of awareness. These are not isolated anomalies. They're recurring patterns. This convergence is perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence we've encountered. If out-of-body experiences were merely cultural inventions or random hallucinations, we would expect them to be wildly different, yet they're not. The core elements, separation from the body, a new perceptual viewpoint, and often a journey through a tunnel to a luminous realm, appear with remarkable consistency across diverse triggers and populations. This suggests we're not dealing with a multitude of different phenomena, but rather with a single, fundamental human potential that can be accessed through many different doorways. The consistency demands that we take the experience seriously, even as its ultimate nature remains shrouded in mystery. We're left with a collection of powerful, personal testimonies backed by intriguing, if incomplete, scientific data. We have the fMRI scans that show the brain rewiring itself in real time to create a disembodied state. We have the well-documented accounts of veridical perception from near-death survivors who saw things they could not have seen. We have the millennia-old traditions that have mapped these inner territories with a sophistication that modern science is only just beginning to appreciate. This tapestry does not offer a simple picture, but rather a profound and challenging mosaic that honestly forces us to question our most basic assumptions about who and what we are. At the heart of this entire mystery lies the central, unresolved debate about the relationship between the brain and the mind. Is consciousness a product of the brain, an emergent property of complex neural computation, a ghost that arises from the machine? Or is the brain more like a receiver, a biological transceiver that tunes into a broader, non-local field of consciousness? The evidence we've gathered can be used to argue for either side of this profound philosophical divide. The out-of-body experience sits directly on the fault line between these two worldviews, a phenomenon that both supports and confounds each perspective, making it a perfect enigma. The scientific evidence, from the TPJ stimulation to the fMRI case, provides strong support for the brain as generator model. These studies demonstrate that the sensation of being in or out of the body is correlated with specific, measurable brain activity. By disrupting certain neural networks, we can reliably induce the feeling of disembodiment. This suggests that the OBE is a neurological event, a trick of perception caused by a failure of multisensory integration. In this view, the experience, however profound it may feel, is ultimately an elaborate and fascinating hallucination. It's a story the brain tells itself when its normal model of reality breaks down under stress, trauma, or stimulation. However, this model struggles to explain the inconvenient data points, particularly the cases of veridical perception during near-death experiences. If the experience is purely a brain-generated hallucination, how can it contain new, accurate information from the outside world, especially when the brain is clinically non-functional? This is where the brain as receiver theory holds its appeal. In this model, consciousness is fundamental, and the brain acts as a filter. And OBE, then, is what happens when the filter is temporarily bypassed, allowing consciousness a more direct and expansive mode of perception, one not limited by the physical senses. This would neatly explain how someone could see the operating room while their brain is offline. We're left in a state of profound uncertainty, suspended between mechanism and mystery. Science has successfully identified some of the wiring involved in the experience, but it hasn't yet explained the nature of the electricity running through those wires. The fact that we can trigger an OBE with a magnet does not negate the possibility that the state itself is a gateway to something more. It may be that both models are partially correct. The brain is indeed the mechanism, the biological hardware through which the experience is processed. But the mind or consciousness itself may be something far more fundamental and far-reaching than the hardware it inhabits. Ultimately, the question of the out-of-body experience transcends the boundaries of science and spirituality and becomes a question about the nature of reality itself. What we call reality is, for each of us, a construct. It's a model of the world built by our brains, based on the limited data stream from our five senses. We live our lives inside this model, assuming it to be a complete and accurate representation of the world. The OBE in all its forms is a profound crack in the wall of that consensus reality. It's a moment where the curtain is pulled back, suggesting that our everyday perception is not the whole story, but merely one channel on a television with infinite stations. The experiences we've documented challenge us to move beyond a simple binary choice between real and hallucination. Maybe this is a false dichotomy. The journeys described by shamans, astral projectors, and near-death survivors are undeniably real as experiences. They're structured, coherent, and often more vivid and impactful than ordinary life. To dismiss them as just a hallucination is to diminish their profound psychological and transformative power. The critical question is whether their reality is purely subjective, confined to the mind of the individual, or whether they provide a glimpse into an objective reality that exists independently of the observer. Consider the possibility that reality is multi-layered. Perhaps the physical world we inhabit is just one dimension, the most dense and tangible layer of a much larger cosmos. In this view, an OBE is not a departure from reality, but a shift in perceptual frequency, a tuning of consciousness to a different, more subtle layer of existence. This framework would accommodate the shaman's spirit worlds, the astral traveler's planes, and the NDE survivor's heavenly realms. It would suggest that these are not fantasies, but actual, albeit non-physical environments that can be perceived when our awareness is untethered from its biological anchor. This is a radical and unproven idea, but it's one that the consistency and strangeness of the evidence pushes us to consider. The experience of leaving the body forces us to be humble about what we know. It reminds us that our senses are limited and our understanding of consciousness is in its infancy. Whether the OBE is a neurological quirk or a journey to another dimension, it serves as a powerful reminder that reality may be far vaster, stranger, and more mysterious than our current science or philosophy can fully comprehend. The final truth may not be a simple answer, but a radical expansion of the question itself. We began this journey with a fundamental question. Are we just biological machines, or are we more than the flesh we inhabit? After exploring the science, the spirit, and the strangeness of out-of-body experiences, we have not arrived at a final definitive answer. To offer one would be a disservice to the complexity of the mystery. Instead, we've gathered clues, illuminated paradoxes, and mapped the edges of our understanding. We've found a phenomenon that stubbornly resists easy explanation, a mystery that honestly just deepens the more we investigate it. The question remains, but now it's richer, more nuanced, and more urgent. Across all the stories, one common thread is transformation. Very few people emerge from a profound out-of-body experience unchanged. The pilot who watched himself fly, the patient who floated above her own resuscitation, the meditator who dissolved into the void. They often return with a new perspective on life. Most commonly, they report a significant reduction or complete elimination of the fear of death. The experience, whether seen as a brain state or a spiritual journey, provides a powerful, visceral sense that the self, the core of one's being, is not extinguished when the body fails. This personal, existential shift may be the most important aspect of the phenomenon. The body may be bound by gravity, constrained by the laws of physics and biology. It's temporary, fragile, and destined to decay. The evidence we've explored, however, hints at a tantalizing possibility. It suggests that consciousness, the mind, the I that experiences the world, may not be subject to the same limitations. From the fMRI scanner that sees the brain let go of the body, to the shaman who believes they can fly to the spirit world, the data points toward a mind that might, under the right circumstances, be free. The journey out of the body is perhaps the ultimate exploration of this potential freedom. This exploration is far from over. As technology advances and our understanding of the brain deepens, we'll continue to probe this mystery. Future studies may one day capture a near-death survivor seeing a hidden target. New brain imaging techniques may reveal even more about the neural correlates of these states. But for now, we're left to ponder the evidence and the implications for ourselves. The stories are real, the science is intriguing, and the mystery is profound. The final conclusion is not one that can be given, but one that must be reached by each of us as we continue our own inner journey into the great unknown. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you would like more videos like this one. Also, go to astralinfo.org to access William Buhlman's website on out-of-body exploration. Thanks for watching. For those interested in diving deeper into the science, history, and personal accounts of out-of-body experiences, here are some references and resources that informed this video. Books such as Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, Consciousness Beyond the Body, edited by Alexander Defoe, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, Adventures Beyond the Body by William Buhlman, offer diverse perspectives on the phenomenon. For a scientific approach, consider The Out-of-Body Experience, The History and Science of Astral Travel by Anthony Peake, and peer-reviewed articles in journals like Frontiers in Human Neuroscience and the Journal of Near-Death Studies. Key research papers include Olaf Blanke's studies on the neurobiology of OBEs, Pim van Lommel's work on near-death experiences in The Lancet, and Susan Blackmore's investigations into the psychology of altered states. For practical resources, organizations such as the Monroe Institute, the International Academy of Consciousness, and the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation provide workshops, archives, and community support for those interested in direct exploration. Links to these resources along with a full bibliography can be found in the video description below. We encourage you to explore, question, and continue your journey of discovery. Thank you for watching. References: Aware Study, Dr. Sam Parnia, Hereward Carrington, Monroe Institute, Pam Reynolds, Robert Bruce, Robert Monroe, Swiss neurologists.